Hi there, everybody. We'll just make a start here. So I'm Councillor Ben Burton, Chair of Planning Committee B, so welcome to everyone here. I'm joined today by Becky Eads, who's Head of Planning and Development Services. She is a late substitute for Gareth, who normally is the manager here, so I would ask people to be mindful of the fact she's a late substitute when proposing questions and give some time for any answers. We'll move on. For a little bit of housekeeping, just remind people to press the microphone button on this when they speak, so it can be recorded. There's toilets to the rear for people that need them, but we will take breaks at the end of applications if people need to go and use those. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if there is a fire alarm, just follow us to the exits, which are going to be out of that door. Our mobile phones off and on silent. And I think that basically covers the key things for this evening. I'll pick up speaking when it gets to that stage in terms of the process for that. So we'll move on to item 2, which is declarations of interest. Does anyone have any declarations to forward? Oh, I always miss number 1. Sorry. Yeah, so I don't see any declaration of interest. In terms of apologies for absence, we've got one apology today, which is Councillor Stephen Fenton, who's not been able to make it. So he's not here. We'll move on to minutes from the previous meeting. Does anyone have any comments on the minutes that they wanted to raise or clarifications? If I don't hear anything else, I assume that's approved then, and we'll move on. So we'll take it's been approved. And item 4 is general public participation, of which we don't have any speakers for general public participation today, just ones on the specific items that we pick up during the course of each item. So we'll do those there. So we'll move on to the first application tonight, which is, so essentially there's item 5A and item 5B, which are the same planning application, planning site essentially. One is for the full proposal and one is for the listed building consent. We'll do the presentation and questions at the same time, but there'll be 2 separate votes at the end for the 2 different elements of the application essentially. Becky, could you take us through the presentation for the development, please?
So you've got 2 applications in front of you for 3 to 7 Coney Street. The proposals for external works to include extensions to the roof to create an additional storey, partial demolition of number 5 Coney Street to form a walkway connection to the rear, a new shop front in association with the creation of commercial, business, service floor space Class E and 7 residential units Class C. So you can see this is the existing site here, outlined in red. I'm just going around it with my cursor there. For reference, the Guildhall is here, Mansion House, city screen down here. Aerial views of the site in here. Aerial views looking the other way, river to the rear, city screen, application site. So these are existing plans that you can see, existing lower and ground floor plans. Just make note of this building here, and then existing first and second floor plans, sections, they're all in your pack for you to look at. Existing elevations. And then this is the proposed demolition of the lower ground floor and the ground floor. So you can see this area here will create a new walkway to the rear and onto the river area to the back. And again, upper floors here. So you can see this is a proposed site plan. Coney Street here. Development in here. The walkway through from Coney Street through here into this opened up area to get round the back here. Again, more floor plans. These are all in your packs. And the elevations. Oh, here we go. There's your site photos. You can see here. This is the application site here, and this is where the new access will be through to the rear of the properties in here. And again, photos looking towards Coney Street if you stood at the back of the site there. I'm going to go back to that site plan. In terms of updates. We just have a minor update to the recommendation. That's to change the change the recommendation so the final wording of the conditions can be delegated to myself, because we need to update some of the conditions in terms of the relationship between the full and the listed building. We also need to amend one requiring investigation works and a further condition with regard to a full waste management plan. That's it for me.
Thank you. Just looking for questions at this point on the plans specifically rather than the report. Does anyone have anything they want clarifying? Councillor Millie, start us off.
Thank you, Chair. Could you just show us on the plans where the bin store is, please, and the route for moving the bins from where they're stored to where they're collected?
Sorry, they're here.
The residential ones.
Mike, David.
Residential ones.
Yeah, where Becky was pointing at the back, that's the low ground floor area. That's all the commercial bins. And if you come forward, Becky, on the ground floor, that's right. That's where the residential bins will be. The idea is that they'll be commercially collected, and they will be pulled out onto Coney Street on the day of collection.
Yeah, Councillor Millie.
There's a few references in the report to the Snickleway and a ramped walkway. Are they the same thing? Are they that same central?
Apologies, that's yes, they are the same. The new Snickleway, the walkway is the same thing. My apologies.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Could you please point out where the mature lime tree is, please?
If Becky goes on to the ground floor plan, right to the end of where the steps come down, no, to the ground floor to the right, Becky, no, yeah, well, it's this, yeah, it's that area there. Sorry, I was going to the plan. Yeah, it's in that area there where Becky's pointing to now.
Yeah, keep going. It's fine.
Could you please point out where the cycle storage is for the residential use? The cycle storage for the residential use of the building?
Yeah, if Becky goes onto the plan again, the cycle storage is partly in this area here, on Coney Street, and also if you go to the low ground floor to the back, Becky, that area there.
So is that in the same place as the bin stores with the same access route in and out?
Yeah, they're using access to the bin store. If you look at the low ground floor plan where Becky was pointing, yeah, there is one access that gives to the commercial store and to the cycle parking.
I think that's my last question. One of the statutory consultees raised some concerns about the Juliet balconies and how that would change the appearance of some of the buildings that are currently distinct, separate buildings, and this might make them look quite similar. Could you please go back to the photos and show us which of the two buildings it is so we can see what their current appearance is?
I can answer that by saying they've been removed from the scheme now. We objected, they've been removed.
Thank you. Not seeing any other questions on the plans, so we'll move forward onto public participation. We've got one speaker, which is Max Reeves from the Helmsley Group, speaking in support. And he'll be joined by Tim Ross as the agent for the application, and Alan Ramsey, the architect, to answer any questions. If you'd like to come forward to speak, you've got 3 minutes to talk, and then if you can stay seated for questions, just make sure the mic's on and start when you're ready, essentially. Do you want a warning when you've got 30 seconds left, or are you just happy to speak?
I can do, I'm well thought.
Okay, fine, great.
Good afternoon, members of the committee. My name is Max Reeves. I'm Development Director of the Helmsley Group. Helmsley Group is a York-based property company with 40 years experience developing and investing in this city. Over the years, we've delivered and continue to plan projects in York Centre that transform underused upper floors above retail units into much needed residential accommodation. These projects are challenging, balancing building constraints with conservation priorities. but they are a great opportunity for the city. They bring residents into the centre where they live and spend, helping preserve York's unique heritage for future generations and sustain its distinctive appeal for both residents and visitors. It's a privilege to present this phase of the Coney Street Riverside Master Plan to you today. Last month, approval was granted for zones 2 to 4, which is the stretch of the Ouse from Pitcher and Piano to Yates's. This application is separate, but it shares the same ambitions: to create spaces that reflect York's character and reconnect the city centre with the river, transforming an underused and neglected area into a destination worthy of this prime location. This proposal focuses on delivering a new route, Snickleway or Ginnell, linking Coney Street to the River Ouse. This will connect to the Riverside Walkway included in the approved plans, tying this end of Coney Street back towards the Guildhall. The design draws on York's distinctive network of intimate streets, creating a vibrant and accessible link between the city and the riverside. Notably, this route broadly follows a historic access, which we are effectively reopening. The plans includes 7 open market residential apartments, 2 small retail units, and 2 restaurants to draw life and activity down to this historic area. While this is a small zone within the larger master plan, its impact will be significant, creating a welcoming, walkable environment that celebrates York's heritage while supporting its future. As with the wider scheme, these plans have been shaped by years of extensive consultation. Input from council officers, heritage bodies, accessibility experts, and community stakeholders have been key. Public consultation, including collaboration with York's University Street Life project, has informed everything from the design details to the proposed uses. Thanks for your time. Any other questions, please let me know. We've got Alan here from Architects and Tim, Planning Consultant.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions? Councillor Orrell, please.
Thank you, Chair. On the carbon reduction section, it says you're going to exceed the requirements. It also says that this suggests the applicant will provide further information at later design stages. How are you going to do that, and what will that involve?
I believe there will be a condition that will cover BREEAM, a BREEAM assessment. So there is a target in there that's set in there, which we'll be working towards in the next stage of detailed design. We'll be working towards that target.
Right. So the details will.
So there is detail to follow. We are looking at improving the thermal performance of the building. We are including solar panels on the roof. There are sections of new roof which can be designed to meet, if not exceed, building regulations requirements. So there are, plus we're in either replacing or refurbishing existing windows, and there's an inclusion of secondary glazing in there, which will improve the thermal and acoustic qualities of the internal spaces.
Thank you. Just perhaps might seem a strange question, but you've got restaurants there and you've got residents above. The restaurants will produce glass to be got rid of. How are you going to manage that? Because the restaurants in the area do that at 5 o'clock in the morning. So will you manage that differently?
Yeah, I mean, it's important that the restaurants we've got going in this scheme are very much aimed at restaurants rather than huge quantities of alcohol, shall we say, put it that way. So, but yeah, there's a management plan to deal with waste and yeah. I lived on Low Petergate for a while, so I can know how much that is.
Yeah, the other thing to say is the bin stores are located at the back of the site for the restaurants. So that's away from the residential, which is in the buildings at the front Coney Street.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Massey, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's supplementary to the point that's just been made by Councillor Orrell. The government has recently announced plans to oblige all businesses to participate in recycling going forwards, because historically we've focused on household waste and done comparatively little. Does your proposal, as we've got it here, in your opinion, enable enough space for the separation of waste by restaurants, by businesses going forward, so that we don't end up with businesses saying they've simply got nowhere to separate their waste?
The commercial bin store that's currently proposed is designed to the current standard for waste recycling, but is bigger, and we're showing more bins than the minimum that we currently need to provide. So there is scope within the current design that we are proposing for additional waste. So if there's a higher requirement comes in for volume of recyclable waste, this development can accommodate quite a bit, up to 50,
Right.
well, up to about 50%.
Just to clarify what I meant, it's not that the businesses will be producing more waste, it's the requirement that they separate it that will take up space differently.
Yeah, they can certainly do that.
Yeah.
So they can certainly do that within the current proposal. The bins will be separated for landfill and recycling, but we do have the space for a lot more, for that facility to be a lot more flexible.
Yeah, the bin store is significantly oversized compared with what it needs to be for current regulations. And the reason for that is we're cognitive of current blight in terms of that area, in terms of businesses putting the bins out in the courtyard. So we wanted to ensure that that wouldn't happen in the future, because the intention is that this is a nice walkway with restaurant seating overlooking it.
Okay. Thanks. Just one question for myself. Obviously, one of the big changes is the creation of the additional Snickleway, and some of the comments around the fact that there's a Snickleway to the side, obviously much smaller. I just really noticed that you mentioned that it broadly follows a historic route. I haven't been able to look back on historic maps, so I just wondered what that historic route was, and whether you can elaborate on what that was, essentially.
Yeah, the historic route was referred to in the design and access statement. I believe it's
the basic plan. Probably just about see it on there. The existing.
put your mic on.
Sorry. So you can see where the curved bit of wall is at the back there, and then through there's kind of a grey area. It's basically, so as you're looking at the plans to the right of the Lush building, we think it went through there and it was a really thin Snickleway. To the right, the other side of Lush. Yeah, that bit there. Yeah, exactly there. Yeah, there. That's what's shown on historic maps. And it's sort of, you can see from the old foundations. And if you look at the, you can see where it's almost been filled in with staircases subsequently over the years.
We've got two more questions, then we'll stop there. So Councillor Collett, please.
Thank you, Chair. You may or may not wish to respond to this, but I'm going to ask the question anyway and invite your response. It just interests me how obviously this is somewhat integral to the wider scheme as you describe it. So why wasn't this part of the application which came earlier?
They're in different. So the way Helmsley works is we pull together private investors to develop schemes. This scheme's in a completely different ownership to the rest of Coney Street down the line. We project manage it on their behalf. And frankly, it was bought at different times, to the rest of it, and it's just come forward on a different time scale.
Yeah. And Councillor Coles, you have a question?
Thanks, Chair. Just a question about sustainability, really. Just I appreciate that the new materials that will be brought into the site would increase sustainability, but presumably there's a cost in the short term when you knock something down. Have you worked out at what point you get to the 0 point before it starts being more sustainable? Does that make sense?
Yeah, like in better carbon score.
Yeah, in terms of you're causing an impact by knocking something down, and then you're making it more sustainable by the materials that you're using. At some point it breaks even and starts to become more sustainable in the long term. Just wonder whether you work that out and how long it has to be the former actually are more sustainable rather than being less sustainable, if that makes sense. Am I making sense?
Just to be clear, though, the majority of this scheme is a conversion of the existing building. So is there only a tiny element that's actually being knocked down?
Yes, I mean, there's not really that balance because we couldn't knock the listed buildings, so we're not demolishing anything other than that creating that access through from Coney Street to the riverfront.
Thanks. Not seeing any other questions, so if you want to take your seat, but thank you for coming in and speaking. Move on to any questions you have for officers on the report or the application before we move into discussions. Anyone want to start with any questions? Not. Yeah, Councillor Vassie.
Thank you. I would like to ask officers if you're happy in terms of the waste collection for commercial businesses, that it will indeed be big enough to accommodate changes in collection of recycling, particularly because there are 2 restaurants here and separating food waste from cardboards and plastics. Are you confident that the space will be there to safeguard this going into the future?
What we can, the answer to that is we can only look at what we've got in front of us now and the uses that they're gaining permission for and whether or not this is suitable for the uses. Yes, it is. It's suitable for what it is now. I can't answer the question of if it's suitable for something in 10 years' time because I don't know what we will be in 10 years' time. Is it suitable for now? Is it suitable for what you're approving? Yes, it is. I can't answer the question for 10 years' time. This is a significant amount of space in them bin stores, which is more than we usually see, which is a positive. But I can't answer because I don't know what the waste solutions will be in 10 years' time.
I understand the point you're making. The government has announced a series of steps now going for the next few years. So we do have some understanding of what's going to be required, but you're happy that it's larger than has previously been provided. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, Councillor Melly, please. And then.
I have a question about the impact on the high street of the loss of the retail space at the bottom on the ground floor, because there's developments in the primary shopping area and in the primary retail frontage. Policy R3 says that proposals involving the loss by change of use of ground floor space, Class E shops will generally be resisted. And I was just wondering, because there's in the immediate vicinity of this development, there's already quite a few restaurants and takeaways, coffee shops, bubble tea places. I'm just wondering what the impact is of further loss of retail Class use space on like the balance of the high street.
Yeah, we have to look at this scheme as a whole, and there is retail proposed as part of it that's commensurate with what's there now, and there's no the change isn't to a degree that would make us concerned that we should be recommending refusal. We've looked at it all in the round, and given the use classes, and it's not new anymore, but the use class E that's so broad now that we think that this is acceptable.
Sorry, what do you mean by commensurate? Like in terms of floor space or frontage or like?
Yeah, in terms of the floor space that there is now and what there will be and the wider uses that this will bring into as well. This is balance. This is going to bring in the upper floors into use that isn't there now. So in totality, we've looked at it and considered that it's a benefit.
Yeah, thanks. Councillor Collick, please.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate that you've maybe not had quite the opportunity to be completely across this application. So I'm sure David might be able to help as well. When an application as complex as this comes forward, and there's been a considerable period of consultation, when we read the objections that have been raised by various bodies, it's not always immediately clear how far those objections have been taken into account in what is now presented. And for example, the question was asked earlier about the Juliet balconies, and the answer was given. Well, they're no longer in the application. Is it possible to tease out, particularly bearing in mind the objections have been raised in, for example, conservation, archaeology, where changes have been effected as a result of those objections. I know that's quite you know, it might require quite a long answer, but it might help because it's not easy to see just how far those objections have been taken account and the application adapted in response to that.
I'm not sure I can cover everything, councillor. I'll try. In terms of the issue about there were concerns about the passageway and removing a unit to create this wide opening. And I wasn't involved in the initial negotiations, but as part of that initial negotiations, it was agreed that that had to be narrowed to be more like a snickleway. And that's done by extending the shop front on the right-hand side into it. That's the one where the snickleway issue was addressed. There was a fair bit of concern about retention of historic fabric in all of the buildings. And that's been negotiated over a long period of time. And the conservation officer felt that as the negotiations as they went on, there was a more nuanced approach towards retaining historic fabric wherever. And as Becky mentioned at the start there, we're actually working on a condition now that will actually introduce a phased requirement of the works. So when they go in, they do inspection, they then provide information to officers. If that's okay, we'll go on to the next stage of further exploration. Again, that will be a stage. So in terms of the fabric, I'm quite happy the way officers negotiate that will be protected and preserved. In terms of archaeology, there was a lot of concern about that from interested parties, but the archaeologist has been on top of this right from the start and required information. She got the information she required, and I think in the report, if I can go to that part of it, she got the information that satisfied her that the deposit that would be protected would be more modern and post-medieval, and on that basis, an archaeological watching brief would satisfy the need to go as the work goes on. So again, I think that's been satisfied by the negotiations that took place. I've mentioned the Juliet balconies. I think that those were the main things that we saw. Sorry, if this is anything else you have, councillor.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I was particularly concerned about the conservation and archaeology. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. That was good. To raise some question. Yeah, Councillor Belly, please.
Yeah, this application's been revised a lot over the last few years. I've been trying to understand the detail of it since before I was even elected to represent this ward, and it's difficult when it's so complex. It's difficult to keep track of all the changes. So one of the concerns I think was from Highways about the Snickleway was to do with the gradient and it not having kind of resting points, level points. Has that been resolved now in the final designs?
Yes, the highways officer, there's been negotiation, they're right up to very close to bringing it to our committee. And the highways officer said the grades weren't quite right and the horizontal elements, but they've now provided a revised plan which has satisfied him on that point.
Councillor Vassey, please, and then I'll come to.
Thank you. Yes, a question about biodiversity and net gain. I notice within the plans a particularly surreal reference to hedgehogs, which I don't imagine there are many on Coney Street. But I did want to ask whether Section 106 agreement had been considered on this now that the rules have changed in order to have net biodiversity gain elsewhere, either close to the site or in a local park. We hear in the report there's quite a few references to the biodiversity of the river and potential impacts of what's going on here. Has consideration been given to Section 106 contribution to enhance biodiversity near the site?
No, because it doesn't have to, because this was submitted before BNG came in. So when BNG was introduced, that's the start date. So anything that's submitted after that date, we can ask for the contributions and the everything that the regs require. This was submitted before then, so there's no requirement of them to do that.
So while that legislation came in February, I think you're saying this predates that?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Cullick. Yes, yeah, sure. Yeah, Councillor Cullick, you want to?
Okay, just with reference to section 106, there is no reference to section 106 apart from obliquely in terms of highways. Is it the case, just out of interest, that if this had come forward as part of the wider scheme, there may have been liability for section 106 payments of one kind or another?
I can't answer that because it didn't come as part of the wider scheme. There's only 7, so there's no requirement. We have to consider what's in front of us, so I can't.
Thank you.
Yeah, Councillor Melly.
Condition 12 is about a biodiversity enhancement plan and the preliminary ecological appraisal. Did that include the river? Like that preliminary ecological appraisal include the river, and does this condition include the river?
The starting point is the red line isn't with it. The river isn't within the red line. But this is for an enhancement plan. I can't answer that, whether or not it include the river. Unlikely, given it's not in the red line, but I can't definitively answer that, I'm afraid.
So if we wanted it to include biodiversity in the river as well as on the site, does that mean we wouldn't be able to add it to the condition if we wanted to?
I don't think you could reasonably add it, given it's not in the red line.
Thanks. Not seeing any other questions. So we'll move on to discussion. At this time, it'll be discussion around the officer recommendation as it stands. I'm happy for discussion on both the full application listed building consent, but when I'm looking for proposing seconders, that'll be for the full application initially. Councillor Waters.
Thank you, Chair. Just to try and assist you and move it on a bit, I'll cut to the chase and move the planning officer's recommendation. I've seldom seen an agenda like this. If you go to page 20, 21, 22, there's at least 10 examples, plus the one we had earlier about the Juliet balconies, where there's been further submissions, revised drawings, etc., etc. Clear to me that there's been a lot of collaborative working to alleviate any concerns and to get us to this point of an approval recommendation. So I'm quite happy to recommend approval.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else to move? I mean, I'm not seeing anything else in terms of discussion at this time from Councillor Cullick. I'll get to you.
I'm not going to raise an objection. I am going to say that there is so much to welcome in what is proposed here, along with the wider scheme and the transformation of what is a vital part of the city centre. As I say, there is so much to welcome. I'm personally sorry that this wasn't brought forward as part of the wider scheme, because I think that there would have been benefits to the city in doing so, particularly in terms of the benefit of section 106 payments that might then have been considered. But taking the application as it is, I would be supportive. And if we're requiring a seconder, I will be happy to do so.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other hands, and we've got a proposal in a second. I guess I'd just add similar views. Essentially, it's a good application, and there is impact on the historic buildings, but I think it's limited. And having gone and poked around in the back of the bins today and had a look at the back of the site, it will be a significant improvement on what's there currently. And I think the additional Snickleway is a good solution, and probably the revised smaller version is probably better in the street scene. So yeah, also minded to support. But in that case, we've already got a proposer and a seconder. So Becky, would you like to take us through their recommendation for the full application, please?
So the full application is recommended for approval, but the final wording to be delegated to myself. Okay.
Great. Okay, can I see all those who are for the officer recommendation as read out there? Okay, that's unanimous, so that application is approved. I will need to seek a proposer and a seconder, unless people have any further discussion on the listed building consent before we take that forward. So, Councillor Waters, please.
Yeah, quite happy to propose that, Chair.
Thanks. Yeah, and Councillor Baxter.
Happy to second that.
Thanks. Okay, yeah, can you take us through that one as well, please? Thank you.
So again, recommended for approval, but to delegate the final wording of the conditions to myself, please.
Great, thank you. Again then, clearly all those who are in favour of the recommendation is read out. And again, that's unanimous, so that application is approved. We'll just take a short 2-minute break there for people to make their way out. But we'll start again at 10 past. Okay, we'll move on to the next item. So joined by Sharon Jackson, who's the planning officer for this application. The items 5C Model Farmhouse, the Green. If you could take us through this one, please, Becky, for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair. So this is a full planning application for construction of one dwelling on land to the rear of Model Farm, following demolition of Nissen huts and barn with associated access, landscaping and parking, and restoration of existing pole barn. So I'll just talk you through the plans here. So this is your existing site plan here. See the road here, existing buildings in here, application site up here. Again, aerial view so you can see. Again, more aerial views. You can see the existing structures here quite clearly. And again, from another angle. So this is your proposed site plan here with your new development up here that I'm currently circling. And the proposed elevations. Again, you can see to replicate the existing structures that are there. Second lot of elevations. And this is the existing and proposed massing section. So you can see your existing ones, the one at the top in relation to the existing structures, and the proposed down here. And this is your existing and proposed hay barn. Again, you can see similar structures there. Photos, access into the site here. Looking through the site. Again, through the site. The existing structures that you can see here back towards the road. More photos of the existing structures. And the barn there. I'll go back to the site plan. There is no updates for this one, so that's it.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions, clarifications on the plans that's just been shown? No, I'm not seeing anything being raised. So we'll move on to public participation. I believe we've got 3 speakers here. So the first speaker is John Davis, speaking in objection. If you'd like to come forwards. Just want to make sure you've turned the mic on and start speaking when you're ready. You've got 3 minutes. Do you want a warning when you've got 30 seconds to go? Or are you happy to speak? Yeah. Great.
I've literally got 3 minutes worth of content, so that's
great.
So that's fine.
Thanks.
Before I start, just to introduce myself, I'm John Davis. I'm the resident next door to the
Microphone.
So, good afternoon, councillors. I wish to speak in objection to the application at Model Farm. Candidly, I am surprised that we even find ourselves here because there is no basis in the planning framework for approval to be given, and I'll explain why. Firstly, there is no doubt that harm will be caused to the conservation area and the setting of the listed buildings, not just on the site, but located around it in this part of the village. The council's conservation officer has explained the level of harm as moderate. It is not negligible or limited. She also noted, quote, the construction of houses is essentially alien to the historic use of the site and will inevitably erode its special landscape and will harmfully change the character of the site. Confusingly, and unlike other reports in this agenda, paragraph 206 in the National Planning Framework is not even mentioned, and this is particularly crucial because 206 states that any harm to a designated heritage asset should require clear and convincing justification, and adds such harm to grade 2 listed buildings should be wholly exceptional. So secondly, therefore, there is no wholly exceptional case that justifies the harm because there is no significant public benefit has been put forward. The restoration of the 2 barns is not a benefit at all. They are prominent and redundant modern structures. Even the applicant's previous heritage statement set out that their removal would have a positive impact. So the only and very minor benefit is 1 extra dwelling added to the housing supply and not one that meets an identified housing need. The report attaches too much significance to this benefit. A number of local planning decisions substantiate this argument. Here are 3 appeal decisions by 3 separate inspectors in York last year where the benefit of 1 new house, even in a sustainable location, was not found to justify the harm that was identified. And then finally, the whole assessment seems to have been based on an incorrect number of dwellings on the site. The number of dwellings on the site is variously quoted as 3 or 4. It's actually 5. as confirmed by the Post Office database, and 5 separate dwellings liable for council tax on the site stay. And I'm surprised that this is ambiguous in the report. A 6th dwelling will breach the council's own guidance on the number of properties that can be served from a private drive. It also underscores the Conservation Officer's comments about intensified and inappropriate domestication and the deleterious impacts of cumulative change on the historic environment. So overall, the balance of the report is skewed in the wrong direction, understating the harm and overstating the benefit, and failing to note the counterbalancing provisions of paragraph 206 that require a wholly exceptional justification to approve. Such justification that has been offered has been rejected by appeal inspectors multiple times in York in the last year, and therefore I urge the committee to refuse. I am grateful for your time.
Thank you. Councillor Orrell, please, question.
Thank you, Chair. The report mentions the use of the hall by a nursery group.
Correct.
Is it used by any other activities?
It's a church hall. It's in use most days by parishioners for a variety of events.
Right, because the impression you got that it was just a nursery. But
No, it's the church hall was newly constructed and put into use. So it's used by drama groups. It's used by a lunch club for pensioners. It's in use most days each week.
Thank you. And another different question. The city rightly is looking for affordable houses there. Do you think this house would be an affordable house?
Well, I think maybe the applicant might be in a better place to determine that, but I think if you were possessed of a 7-figure salary, then probably yes.
Right. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you for your time.
The next speaker is Edie Jones, speaking on behalf of the Share the Neighbourhood Plan. Thanks. Thanks. You've got 3 minutes if you want to start speaking when you're ready.
Okay, my name's Edie Jones. This is the neighbourhood plan. Okay, Poppleton have had a neighbourhood plan in place since 2017. 91% of the voting population of the village indicated that the planning document was to be considered for housing, planning and other developments, whether it were to take place until York had a local plan in place. Still, currently, there's no local plan. So the neighbourhood plan and the references to the NPPF all date back to when this was put together, which was August 2017 when it was approved. Model Farm is a grade 2 listed building. And under the site examination, which is part of the 12 documents that you have to produce before you can produce this, it was considered that the upgrading of the substantial and permanent buildings was an important part to the character and setting of the conservation area, and it was supported. So the houses that were there were substantial and they've been beautifully done up. I cannot praise how well they look. It was a rundown farm and it now looks like a really nice mews area. The houses are not cheap there and will not be cheap there. It was not considered suitable for refurbishment of the Nissen huts because they were a remnant from the Second World War. They're not part of the historic settlement of the farm. They were only ever used for the 6 weeks of the lambing season because the lambs were brought in there, the ewes were brought in there to lamb and the sheep were put out in the field. So it's not anything that was permanent. There is, however, right next door to it, community buildings, the church hall, the garden. It's used extensively. There's an old age club during the winter that allows people to go there for warmth, for food and for comfort and socialization. Really important. The church is a noisy place because children are noisy, they sing loudly, and that's going to create an ambience around the place, which will be lovely for the village, but probably very annoying if you were to live in a house right next door to it. I did want to hand out all the information that's related to this with the NPPF. We have NPPF 3, which refutes this because it's all to do with the conservation area. NPP 4, which states that the Nissen huts will not be in size and proportion to what's there already. To give you some idea, the present house is, or the new house that will be there, is 2.4 times bigger than the present house. So it's not going to look as if it's in scale with what's there and what was there originally. When this MPPF, when the plan was examined by the examiner in the ratification process, he recognised that the farm could be tastefully developed and the open space kept and the total charm of the farm, but he would not support additional development on the plot. And that's why they helped us when we were writing the plan to write it to
That
say
is your 3 minutes, if you can just.
that
wrap
this
up
would
there.
not support extra development. Okay,
Thank you.
any
Can you
questions?
just, yeah, does anyone have any questions for the speaker? Yeah, Councillor Cullen, please.
I was listening very carefully, but because of the interruption, quite understandably, you'd had your 3 minutes. Could you just repeat the last part again so I can catch what you were saying?
Well, basically what I was saying was that the examiner for the plan came and walked around the site, looked around the site. He recognised that the redundant farm buildings, which were substantial and permanent, could be developed, and we supported that. We've always supported that. But he said that the area behind it, which is an open field and the Nissen huts, led a wonderful vista, and it actually set the whole ambience of the area. It still looks like a really beautifully developed farm set of buildings, and that's great. The Nissen huts and this proposed development won't add anything to it. It's one house. It's right next door to the church and all the noise that's going on there. It's not going to be affordable. It's not going to be affordable housing in anybody's language. It's just not adding to the ambience of the area or anything like that. We need houses, there's no denying that. We've got 266 houses in Poppleton now that are on the former site where the playing fields were. We're going to have 1,120 houses on what was the former British Sugar site, and 30% of that is inside Poppleton. So we're not against houses. It's just, this is the wrong house, the wrong place, and it's just not suitable for the place won't take it. There's nowhere for anybody to hang out their washing. How's that good?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Waters, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wonder if you'd describe how long it actually took to produce your neighbourhood plan, and as to whether you feel there's any more policies that this particular application doesn't comply with.
Thank you. The whole process from start to finish took 3 3/4 years. It was examined, it was cross-examined. We had to do a survey, first of all, to see what people wanted in the village. Then we had to do a site assessment. We had to do a strategic environmental assessment. We had to do a habitat assessment. We had to do a housing assessment. We had to do a basic statements assessment. It's a lot of work. It was 6 people every week meeting and digging into it. And they were all, I won't say they were all university graduates. Some of them weren't university graduates at all. Some of them were. And it was just a huge amount of learning process to do it. We were the first village to actually complete it. And we've lent everybody everything that we did so that they could carry on with it. In terms of the policy that would apply to it as well, it's quite clear in the policy document. The policy 6BF says that we would not support, it says here that only, sorry, let me just find, I've got it here, right. And as far as planning permission is required, conversion of buildings of a permanent and substantial construction to residential use will be supported. We've said that already. It can be demonstrated that the conversion of the building will not generate a demand for a replacement building in the future in accordance with Greenbelt policy and National Planning Framework policy. This is a demand for an extra house where we'd already approved what was there. Does that help? Thank you.
Thanks. I'm not seeing any other questions, so thank you for your time speaking.
All right, thank you.
Take a seat. Move on to the final speaker, which is Jamie Piper, speaking in support as the agent for the applicant. If you want to step forward. You've got 3 minutes, so you're happy with timing. We'll just start when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair. As is outlined in your office's report, this application relates to a site which is wholly contained within the settlement limits of Poppleton and is outside of the green belt and not subject to any designations which would preclude new development. For those of you familiar with Poppleton, you will have seen over the past few years my client's uncompromising efforts to fully restore Model Farm and the associated buildings which can be seen from the village green. As a resident of Poppleton for over 50 years, this scheme has not been about profit, but my client's desire to leaving a lasting legacy to the village, and undoubtedly the works completed to date have transformed what was until recently a derelict farmstead in the heart of the village. The scheme before you today seeks to complete the site by redeveloping existing derelict buildings which are located towards the rear of the site and not easily visible from the road. These existing buildings are in a poor state of repair and without purpose, and these proposals will enhance this part of the site, delivering the same quality as that which has been achieved in the front part of the site. Recognising that the site is within a conservation area, prior to the submission of this application, we engaged in detailed discussions with the Civic Trust and the Conservation Area Advisory Panel, both of whom fully support the principle of redevelopment of these buildings, and the approach has been taken. Similarly, our heritage consultant considers no harm to arise from these proposals. During the course of the determination of this application, we have worked very closely with your officers in refining the proposals, which has resulted in a reduction in the number of units from 2 down to 1. We consider the proposed dwelling to offer an innovative approach which seeks to retain the agricultural character and history of the site, whilst providing a modern home in a highly sustainable location. Whilst it is understood that the development of this part of the site might not be to the liking of a well-organised local few, it is considered that the proposals will finish off this site and remove existing derelict buildings which are a detractor to the site and the conservation area. All technical matters have been resolved to the satisfaction of consultees. There will be no impact upon residential amenity, and the proposals align with the planning policies which seek to guide the location of new development. It is believed that the design present provides optimum solution for the site and has satisfied 2 esteemed conservation bodies and represents a far better solution to the alternative, which would be to do nothing and allow these buildings to continue to deteriorate. I appreciate that there is some localised objection to these proposals, but I would ask that members take a balanced and objective view, recognising all of the heritage benefits that my client has already delivered at Model Farm and his desire to finish this site off, and in accordance with your officer's recommendations, support the application. Thank you.
Thanks. See any questions? I have one myself, which is I've heard a lot about the impact on the whole neighbouring property. Can you just talk about what you've done in terms of mitigation for the impact on that?
Well, when we submitted the application originally, as mentioned, we did actually have 2 dwellings on the site, one of which the second dwelling was to be where we've now got the refurbished car garage area. So we've reduced the scale of the development in terms of the number of dwellings. But similarly, we've also reduced the size of the Nissan Huts dwelling in accordance with discussions with your officers. There's also been some sort of minor refinements as well during the process through discussions with the Civic Trust and the Conservation Area Advisory Panel that occurred before the application was actually submitted. But ultimately, there is already structures on this part of the site already. So it's not that we're starting from a blank canvas. There is already something that sits on this part of the site in a similar form.
Thanks. Not seeing any other questions, so if you'd like to take a seat, thank you for your time speaking. Move on to questions in relation to the application to officers. Does anyone, Councillor Baxter, if you'd like to start off, and then Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chair. It's just in relation to the comments about how many properties there already are on this particular area. I don't know if one of the officers is able to provide clarity on how many there is, and if it is over the 5 that complies with CYC's regulations on it. Has there been any other instances where there's been more than 5 on a private road? Thank you.
The Model Farm complex, as you can see on the site plan, currently has 4 dwellings. So you've got a converted cart shed building, which is a 1-storey building, which is adjacent to the Methodist Church Hall. And on the opposite side, you've got model farmhouse and then the converted barn. So that's 3 houses. To the back of model farm and the converted barn are 2 former granary buildings. Both have been converted. One of the buildings is in association with model farmhouse. It's an annex. So it's which is basically it's part of the residential occupants property issues for a family member. I believe it's the resident's parents. So that house, they jointly come together as one property because they share all the outside facilities, etc. It's just giving some independence. And then next door to that, there is the other former granary building, which is now in residential use. So in total, there is 4 dwellings on the site at the moment. Is it?
Supplementary, yeah, Councillor Collins.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the response. Reference was made to the number of properties in terms of council tax. Is it possible to just explain how many properties are subject to council tax within this site?
I have no idea what
Can I come in here? Sometimes it's slightly different in terms of council tax and planning. This is something that comes up occasionally. But what we are looking at are the planning units here and the fact that highways haven't objected.
Councillor Orrell, please.
Yeah, just supplementary to that, I've got other questions after. There are 4 houses with one being used as an annex currently. If that property was sold, there could then be 2 properties there rather than 1.
It would need permission to be used as a separate property and not an annex, so they'd have to come into planning permission, then we'd have to look at it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you had further questions, yeah.
The speaker, the applicant said it's not in the green belt now. Will it be in the green belt in the local plan? No. Okay. And the other question was in relation, when I find it, to the page 10355, it talks about the carbon reduction, and you turn over, it says these objectives required will be secured through a planning condition on any future planning permission. How does that work? Yeah.
The application being
Could be a faulty one.
Sorry. Should the application be approved, then we would apply that condition, which talks about reductions of 70% in line with Part L of the building regulations. We would put that condition on.
Right, so it's not a future, it's this application, not a future one.
Yes, it just
Okay.
future planning permission if there was a future planning permission.
Thank
Maybe
you.
it was wrongly worded, apologise.
Yeah, Councillor Collins, and then I'll come to you.
Thank you, Chair. We heard extensively from one of the public speakers about the local plan. What weight do we give to that local plan in terms of the things we were hearing in the context of considering this application? Sorry, I meant the neighbourhood plan, forgive me, of course, neighbourhood plan.
Right, okay. So your neighbourhood plan is an adopted document, so it has full weight.
Just as a supplementary on that, I think there's already comment in the report itself, but is it worth just outlining how you kind of assess this against the neighbourhood plan in terms of impact?
So I looked at the conservation area appraisal for the Upper Poppleton, and which is in excuse me, PNP 3 of the document, as well as PNP 4, which is the village design statements. So they were the starting point of the assessment of the application.
Councillor Waters, do you have a question? Is it a supplementary? Sorry.
Again, I just find it so confusing that you've got two totally opposite views on this neighbourhood plan. The people that's obviously drawn it up, Poppleton Neighbourhood Plan Committee, and obviously the relevant parish council feel that it's not in compliance with those policies that's been adopted, and yet the planning officer's assessment seems to be that it is. So, like I say, just confusing to me, put it that way.
Yeah, one thing I would raise from the briefing I had yesterday, chair's briefing, was because Gareth isn't here, was part of some of the objections related to the open nature of the field and as an open space. Now, the neighbourhood plan doesn't actually allocate that specific field as an open space, so it doesn't actually provide with that weight. While it might be considered by locals as having that, it might be seen as a view, but it isn't actually given that allocation within the plan, so it doesn't actually get given the kind of weight that an area that was allocated as a green open space would be received in some sense. So sometimes what is written on the document is different to what people felt like they wanted to achieve from the document. I guess it's partly some of the issue that comes up, which is the situation. Councillor Melly.
Thanks, Chair. Could you please clarify the height difference between the current Nissan huts and the proposed development? There's on page 125, there's cross sections, but I'm just struggling to understand the numbers.
The proposed height of the new dwelling will be in the region of 4.2 metres, which is lowered to 3.7 metres in the connecting green roof. We did consider it to be of a more or less similar scale to the existing Nissan buildings, but I don't know exactly what their heights were.
Just give me a second. I think I'm out. So if you look at this drawing on here, okay. So if you look at page 125, there is existing massing that says plus 21.66, and then there is proposed massing is plus 22.03. So there is. It looks like it is slightly higher, but it is minimal in terms of any difference. I can't tell you exactly, but that's the best I can find in terms of differences.
Yeah, that's the page I was looking at, but I wasn't sure what the units were, like 21.66. What?
I haven't got a scale rule to be able to do that for you, I'm afraid. So it's, what did you just say? No, minimal, I think, is what we're going with.
Thanks.
Councillor Bassey, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm looking through the objections that have been made, and on page 102, there's reference made to a change of use of the land will restrict possible use of the field and all areas beyond the already converted agricultural buildings for the purpose of small-scale agriculture. I wonder if officers could tell us whether the area is actually used for small-scale agriculture at the moment, or whether it's part of a residential dwelling now. To understand the context of this as a farm.
There is no agricultural settlement on the site or near the site in the field beyond. As we understand, there certainly isn't anything at Model Farm. I think it was abandoned in the 1970s.
Thank you.
Not seeing any further. No, sorry, do you want to?
Sorry,
Yeah,
Chair,
if that's
and
it.
before if you were about to move into debate, may I interrupt at this point before you do, in order to clarify something which I think I need to clarify in relation to the policy position that one of the speakers, Mr. Davis, said about the heritage test in the MPPF, or the test for the impact on listed buildings. Mr. Davis referred to paragraph 206 of the MPPF, which does say, as he said, that any harm to or loss of the significance of a designated heritage asset should require clear and convincing justification. He went on to say that substantial harm to or loss of a Grade 2 listed building should be exceptional. That is exactly what the policy says. However, my understanding is that paragraph 206 does not apply to this application because the officer's report says that the harm to the listed buildings is less than substantial. If that is correct, and the officer will correct me if I'm wrong, in which case the exceptional test does not apply. The test which does apply is set out in paragraph 5.16 of the officer report, which is the test set out in paragraph 208 of the MPPF, which is that where a development proposal will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, then it is necessary to balance the public benefits against that harm. I just needed to clarify that.
Yeah, thank you,
you.
Sandra. That was appreciated. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll move into debate and discussion on the officer recommendation as it stands. If anyone would like to start this item, I'm not seeing anything. I mean, I'm happy to start us off if no one else has anything to add at this point. I can understand concern around the impact on the neighbourhood plan. In some ways, I can understand the frustrations that are there, but I don't know. For me, I think this is a well-designed scheme in terms of what the approach to conservation, the approach of trying to reuse. I actually think it's quite an attractive building. I think the benefit of bringing what is a dilapidated shed over the road back into use as a parking one is quite an innovative use of the land, and is better than what was being proposed before in terms of 2 dwellings by the sounds of it. So for me, I am personally minded to support the application, and I'd be happy to propose that we move to vote. Councillor Baxter, please.
Yeah, I'm very happy to second, Chair. I think if you look at quite a few of the pages, there's clearly been significant changes, and the Conservation Officer saying that there's been improvement of the scheme. So that's encouraging that there seems to have been a change. And as you say, I think it's quite a nice, well-designed scheme and fits in with the character. So I'm happy to second that.
Before we move, is anyone else? Yeah, Councillor Orrell.
Yeah. I'm still very concerned about the impact that what the neighbourhood plan says. And we had the lady speaking about it was very eloquent about what they had to do to get the neighbourhood plan. You were actually very quick to get it done in 3 years. The one in Huntington took about 6. So, and you spoke very well about all the impacts that it would have. In terms of amenity, that it would have it says it would have not have a substantial impact in terms of amenity, but there's no definite public benefit from it. So I think those counteract each other, because there's no public benefit in terms of affordable housing, because it won't be an affordable house. So again, the neighbourhood plan is being downgraded and not taken into sufficient account. So I don't think I can support the application.
Thank you. Councillor Waters, please.
It's not often I'd say this, but I'm genuinely torn because the proposals look to me to be a very imaginative reuse, should I say, of those buildings. But we keep coming up against this neighbourhood plan issue. And the lady says that they spent 3 years. Well, Councillor Orrell says they spent 6 or 7 at Huntington. Well, I can beat that with Merton, who've been on with it for 10 years. Even though I keep saying to them, by the time you get it finished, they'll probably be binned anyway. But this is another example of where people that spent all that time producing neighbourhood plans, I'll be thinking, well, what was the point? We still haven't had a clarity as to why there's 2 different views on these policies in the neighbourhood plan. But it just seems churlish to refuse what is a very good looking scheme on paper. And I'm genuinely torn, and I'm honestly leaning just to abstaining on it. But I feel very strongly about these neighbourhood plans, and we go back in time to the village design statements, which I remember one council leader saying at a public meeting were a waste of time, and it's been proved. And I just hope neighbourhood plans and the time that people have spent on them are similarly viewed.
Yeah. Thanks. I mean, I think it's worth saying that we don't see a lot of what neighbourhood plans influence, because people change their applications because the neighbourhood plan exists. As someone who's worked on putting planning applications forward elsewhere, it actually influences what's brought forward. And if it wasn't for the neighbourhood plan being in place, we'd probably see a lot of things brought forward that were different to what we see here. So I do think they have weight and add value beyond what we sometimes see, where people might feel like they disagree with something that comes up. So I think it's just worth mentioning that. Does anyone, I mean, we've had a pros in a second. Does anyone else want to speak? Councillor Bassey and then Councillor.
Yeah, I share many of the observations that have been made. I think what's interesting is that we've, in a sense, created our own challenges here. We require people to demonstrate that whatever they propose fits into the area in which it's proposed for. And plainly, this has been designed to replicate as close as possible the existing structures in an imaginative way. And I would imagine that that would be at least partially in response to all the policies that we have. So while I share the concerns about the amount of attention that's given at this moment to the neighbourhood plan, I do think that I'm tending towards supporting the scheme because it is a well-designed scheme that in many other respects fits very well with its locality.
Councillor Colley, you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I certainly, in terms of the scheme itself, I think it is very ingeniously designed, and I recognise that. But I don't find myself able to support this application. I think that the public benefit that needs to be borne in mind to outweigh the harms that are clearly identified. The creation of one dwelling, I don't regard in the planning balance of being of sufficient public benefit to outweigh those harms. And therefore I found myself unable to support the application.
Thank you. Not seeing anyone wanting to speak, and we've had a proposer and a seconder for moving the vote. So we'll progress forward. Becky, if you could take us through the recommendation, please, for the vote.
Sorry about that. So the recommendation is as page 110, which is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions listed in the report. Thank you.
Thank you. In that case, can I see all the hands for all those who are for the offer recommendation as it stands? Okay, and all those who are against, and all those who abstain. Thanks. Okay, in that case, the application's approved, and we'll move on. But I'm just going to take a short break for 2 minutes there, and then we'll return if people want to make their way out. Thank you. Okay, we'll pick back up there, move into the final application, land to the west of 128 Garthway, which is back after being deferred. Becky, do you want to take us through the presentation for this, please?
Yeah, I'm going to go through this presentation fairly quickly, given that you've seen it already. So the application is a full planning application for the erection of 14 dwellings with associated infrastructure following the demolition of 2 garage courts. So that your existing site plan here, your existing garage blocks, aerial photos, it shows the garage blocks to be demolished, the existing properties here, the entrance in. Again, photos of the site, the garage blocks, and the proposed site plan, where you can see the new properties that fan round the back here. Proposed elevations of the house types, floor plans, and they are all in your report. I will draw members' attention to page 128, 1.6 to 1.9, which refers to the submission of further information by the applicant in terms of an addendum to the arboricultural impact assessment and the issues around the hedge that we've now addressed in the report. That's it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone have any queries on the plans before we go? Councillor Waters, please.
Not so much on the plans, on that additional condition 25. Is it possible, or are we legally able to put something extra into that condition that compels JRHT to give new occupiers a copy of basically do's and don'ts as regards the management of that edge? Because it's saying that they'll be able to put it from the eastern side. It needs to be made clear to people that they can't affect the height, they can't cut beyond the boundary. It might sound a bit harsh and prescriptive to be asking for that, but there are 2 quite distinct examples in York on JRHT developments, one of which was Derwentthorpe Phase 4, where the boundary edge was supposed to be retained in its entirety. If anybody sees that now, they will realise that was a joke. And probably, I would have said, one of the worst examples ever, and that's Meadow Way, Huntington, which I'm sure Councillor Orrell will realise. There was a magnificent boundary edge there, virtually disappeared. And that was, people move in, they don't want the leaves, they don't want the mess, they say, oh, we want more daylight. It's all right us having a condition here between the council and JRHT. We need to be sure and content that the new occupiers of those properties are going to abide by any condition. Because once a great chunk has been taken out of a mature hedgerow, it's not a 5-minute job for it to grow back. And that was one of the main sticking points with the deferral last time, the maintenance of that edge. So I do think it's important.
Any of you, I can answer a little bit, but if you've got something, Sandra, that you wanted to raise.
Well, as I understand, Councillor Waters, you're asking for condition 25, is that correct, to be amended?
Yes.
To say that the occupiers of these properties cannot touch the hedge, which is on outside the application site.
Well, it's to amend it so that JRHT can fully. It's to amend it so that JRHT make new occupiers of those properties fully aware of the requirements of the management plan, which I looked at this morning on the planning file, and the do's and don'ts around that hedgerow. You know, if somebody moved in and chopped it back to the boundary and then erected a close boarded fence, it will similarly compromise the edge.
Well, the legal position is that, of course, you are entitled to cut down branches that overhang your property, but you cannot cut down a hedge which is not on your property. So that is covered by the legal position.
Yeah, if I can add, I think the thing that's changed through this application quite significantly is that the hedge the stems, the core parts of it are now essentially entirely in the ownership of City of York Council. So it's on council land. So the people living in there, applicant is cutting it back to our land as the council, well, the council's land, which they can do because it overhangs onto their boundary. But it sits within the council's ownership and sits outside of the red line plan. So I think it's probably, I think this conversation we've had, it's going to be very difficult to enforce these kind of things, but I think it's something we can very much ask of the applicant when they come forward. But because it sits outside the red line plan, it's very difficult for us to put anything onto that request. But I don't know, because that's during the development, is that not right? Or is that in the whole thing? Because that's during the agricultural impact assessment, but I don't think that actually continues into post-development because of the way it's set up, is my understanding from the briefing.
Yeah. I see where you're getting, exactly where you're coming from, but I don't think from either a planning or a legal point of view, we can make them do it as part of a planning condition. It's not reasonable. What we have got in the planning condition is reasonable in terms of the management recommendations. We think that's enough to secure that hedge, which is what the issue was previously. To go above and beyond that, I personally don't think is reasonable, and Sandra's nodding.
Yeah, Councillor Waters, I'm happy to come back.
If I hadn't quoted examples of similar JRHT schemes where, despite conditions, similar boundary edges have been compromised or indeed removed after planning permission, if I hadn't been able to quote those examples, then yes, I might agree it's not reasonable. But bearing in mind what's happened elsewhere under JRHT's, on JRHT's watch, I do think it's reasonable. And I think it's more than reasonable that occupiers of properties who won't really understand the planning conditions, they won't really understand the legal position, just a simple do and don't guide to basically what they can and can't do with that hedge.
I was going to, essentially, the council can still enforce damage to the hedge because it's our property. Well, the council's property team. So if they started damaging the hedge and the hedge was damaged, had to come out, then legally that's Joseph Rowntree's responsibility and the occupant's responsibility for not damaging our property. I think what we're saying is we can't request this through the planning, but I think it's a very fair thing to request of Joseph Rowntree, but I don't think we're going to be able to do it through the planning process, because if it's Joseph Rowntree's benefit that they aren't damaging our hedge, because then they'd be legally responsible for the hedge, essentially. That'd be criminal damage in some sense if they went around and cut our hedge down, or their occupiers went and cut our hedge down. That would be criminal damage, but we can't mitigate this through the planning process. That's the advice that we seem to be getting. I know we had this conversation yesterday with Gareth in terms of what enforcement and what we can do through the conditions, and it's fairly limited because of this situation, essentially. But I think it's something worth bringing up, essentially, if you'd like to, when you're speaking to the applicant when they come up. Yeah, Councillor Orrell.
First of all, we agree that it is a City of York hedge. That has been confirmed?
Yes.
It has. Right, good. At the moment, it's part of the sports field there. So do we know who maintains the hedge now?
Yeah, 1.7. Along the western boundary of the site is outside the development site boundary and is on land owned by CYC and leased to a third party.
Yeah, leased to a third. So the third party maintains the hedge.
Yes, because it's leased by them, but it's still under CYC's ownership.
Okay, so the third party needs informing of all these decisions as well. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's a good.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
Sorry, propose a solution to this. Could we get the council and Joseph Housing Trust to agree to erect permanent signage by the hedge so that it was clear to anyone the status of the hedge and that it shouldn't be cut? Would it be possible for the council and JR and Joseph Housing Trust to agree that?
I think the advice is that it wouldn't be reasonable to do through planning, but we can ask someone to take it away after this and have officers have that conversation. So yeah, that is something we can ask of officers to have that discussion essentially. But that's not as our role as a planning authority, essentially. That's councillor Oral.
So we couldn't propose a condition, and if the committee agreed to that condition?
Chair, I would say that that would not meet the tests for conditions, and just remind them, this is outside of the red line boundary of the application site.
Okay.
Okay, I'm willing to take one more question on this. Councillor Waters.
Right, well, we put informatives on, whether they're ever enforced or not is a different matter as regards protection for verges, which are outside the red line boundaries of most applications. Can we not put an informative on them to protect this edge?
Theoretically, yes, you could put that on. But there would be we couldn't enforce against it, as you've clearly just said. We could put the problem is I'm not sure what that informative would achieve, because we've clearly said it's in CYC's ownership, it's outside the red line. We can't require them to do a sign because it's not a condition, and we've told you that the condition is not reasonable. So realistically, I don't think an informative is actually going to achieve what you're wanting it to achieve. So then I'm rounding back on myself and going, well, actually, an informative won't actually do anything that you're wanting to achieve. And our advice is that you can't condition what you're wanting to achieve. And if you're not confused, but you see where I'm trying to get to.
But an informative will be a written expression of our concerns at this meeting, presumably when this scheme is approved.
But that's not what informatives are for. You've clearly done it in a public forum that you're not happy, and anybody can see that. Informatives aren't to be used to say, we're not happy with this, do this. That's not how they're supposed to work.
So again, we go back to the verge informatives. Why is that put on a planning application then?
But I think the advice, yeah. I mean, I'm going to stick with the advice, but I do get your concern. I know why you're raising it. So, I mean, it's understood. But I don't think we're going to put it onto this one. Questions? Oh, yeah. Losing track of where we were. Right, I've not seen any further questions, so we'll move on to public participation. We have one speaker, Catherine Jukes, in support as the agent for the application. You've got 3 minutes, Catherine. Do you want any warning, or are you happy to speak? Yeah.
Good evening. I'm here to speak in support of the application for 14 affordable dwellings after consideration of the application was deferred back in August. To be honest, I was left extremely disappointed by the discussions that evening, especially as delaying determination of this application only affects those most in need of affordable housing. I must remind you that the application was deferred simply so that further information might be provided in respect to the management of a hedge along the western boundary of the site. We've gone away, revised the tree survey to include reference to the hedge, and reached agreement with Tim Bradley, Harvey Lowson, Andy McIlwraith and Dan Calvert as to how the hedge is to be protected and retained in its entirety. If some of the names I've mentioned are familiar to you, then that is because they are officers of the council, as the hedge in question is owned by the council. To be clear, the application was deferred so we might provide information regarding the hedge that sits outside of the red line of the application site and will therefore be unaffected by the proposal. Joseph Rowntree had no plans to remove the hedge or reduce its height or cut it back, as it's owned by the council. The management plan therefore simply makes clear how the hedge will be protected by fencing during construction. Any gaps are now to be filled by Joseph Rowntree at Joseph Rowntree's expense, with the agreement of council officers, and then a stop-proof fence to be erected to protect the hedge in the long run and to make clear the boundary for the benefit of the occupants. As such, its clear value will be enhanced and the hedge protected in its entirety. At the time of submission, this application exceeded building regulation standards. It meets accessibility standards beyond those that are necessary. It includes renewable source of energy and has the opportunity for solar panels to be added at a later date that don't require council approval due to permitted development rights. This application was submitted in March 2022, and the delays in its determination have only served to slow the delivery of much needed affordable housing to meet the needs of the city. I therefore urge you to simply note that the information requests have been provided and to approve the application, as there is no need for further debate, but there is a proven need for the affordable housing.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions at this point? Councillor Coles, please.
I was going to engage in the debate about the hedge before, but I decided it was probably better to do it in this, in the context of the public representation. I just looking at a map, and there are already what looks like about 10 houses, which I assume are Joseph Rowntree houses on White Rose Avenue that back onto the same hedge. My question was just, have there ever been any issues with those dwellings and the maintenance of the hedge from those, which I assume are also either social or affordable houses that also back onto that hedge just before it reaches the New Earswick, what looks like the New Earswick Tennis Club. And apologies also for the August delay, because I think I wasn't at the August meeting, so I was on holiday. So apologies if my absence in August led to this application not being passed in August. But just if you could clarify the just the situation with the other residents on what I think is White Rose Avenue, which look like Joseph Rowntree houses that back onto the same hedge.
Thank you. I have to say, after that last committee meeting, I went straight down to site and I went for a walk down both sides of the hedge, and I actually climbed inside it just to fully understand what was going on. Because at the end of the day, you know, the hedge sits outside of the site and we hadn't ever been concerned with it because we knew we weren't ever going to touch it. It sits there, it exists. In terms of walking down the boundary, the size of the boundary, it's quite clear it's an extremely mature hedge. It's been there for an awful long time. It's well established. And even though it has got existing houses backing onto it further up, they haven't disrupted its existence and how it has been quite clearly maintained by the sports clubs. So what's been quite interesting, the sports club, half of the land to the north, so where the car park is in the land to the north, that's actually leased from Joseph Rowntree, and then the southern part of their facilities is then leased from the council. So we are talking about a boundary where there's a club that Joseph Rowntree are actually already involved with in their management.
Thanks. And Councillor Orrell.
Thanks, Catherine. Thanks for coming back. Last time you mentioned that you were considering putting solar panels on the houses. Any further information on that?
You'll have heard I just slipped a line in about just making clear that it is something that Joseph Rowntree will be able to do without the need for planning permission. So it's not necessarily something that needs to be put on the drawings to be approved, because it's something that can be looked at a later date.
So you're going to do that?
It's been considered, but I can't say that it is going to happen, but it's been considered.
So what factors are putting it in doubt?
We can only consider what's on the application in front of us, Councillor Orrell, so it's
I'm
you'll
unable
have
to
to
speak on
save your
behalf
questions
of
for later.
Joseph Rowntree's
Yes,
management. So it is that there is a possibility, and it is something that can be revisited.
Yeah,
thank you.
Not seeing any other questions, so thanks for your time coming down. Move on to general questions, although I seem to have spelled into that earlier. But does anyone have any further questions following the speakers' comments? I'm not seeing any. No, Councillor Orrell.
A quick one. The shared ownership houses, will they be sold at affordable housing rates or market rate?
If they're classified as shared ownership, right?
Perhaps I should have asked Catherine that. Sorry.
Yeah.
It says affordable. Chair, Catherine's mouthing affordable, so that's fine. It is significant because the.
Yeah. I just wanted to check exactly what
reduced
type we were
because of
talking
that.
about here before I answered the question, but if it's all social. Right, fine, it's all for, yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah, there's affordable housing still be affordable levels. Okay, right, I'm not seeing any questions, so we'll move into discussion on the officer recommendation as it stands. So someone, Councillor Melly, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, when we considered this last time, I think we talked quite a lot about things like the use of the existing garages for accessibility needs. We talked about the architectural style and the layout of the highways and turning circles and how waste would be collected. And after all that discussion and the discussion about the hedge, I haven't checked the webcast, but I'm pretty sure I voted. I think in the planning balance, I voted for approval. And now, this is the same application, but we've had further clarification about the status of the hedge, further reassurance about its protection. And so I'm still minded to approve.
Yeah, Councillor Baxter, thank you.
Yeah, just want to echo Councillor Melly's comments. I think we all know how much there is a need for affordable housing in the city. And there's clearly been some work on the now infamous hedge to see what can be done about that. And it's the council's land, which I think we need to remember. So happy to support this.
Councillor Coles, and I'll come to Councillor Owen.
I was just going to second, if that was a proposal, I was going to second that proposal from Councillor Baxter. And if it wasn't a proposal, I was going to propose that we move to approve.
Okay, we'll take that as the proposal. I think it's what I've been advised. And okay, thank you. Councillor Orrell, you wanted to speak.
I don't think any of us objected to the principle of the development, but we did have various concerns about aspects of it. Councillor Cole mentioned that the hedge behind White Rose Avenue. I think you might find those gardens are significantly bigger than the gardens that are going to be on this development. That was a concern we had, that it looked in some areas overdevelopment, but that's a minor point, I think, in the development. I'd like to propose another condition, Chair, that solar panels be installed on the as part of the development. I'll explain if you like. We're having heat pumps. It is completely logical that you have solar panels if you're having heat pumps, because heat pumps take a lot of electricity.
No, they had. Is all I'm going to say. We haven't. There's very strict guidance on what we can request in terms of carbon reduction measures, and which go up to a certain standard. This has been pretty heavily tested by the council itself to see whether we can ask for more. We've been able to do that, so I think to apply it to a single scheme would be unacceptable, and has previously happened to a council scheme before and was unacceptable then. So, yeah, I can't support that. I don't think would be acceptable to put it on.
I'm making a proposal, Chair. Is there a seconder for it?
Okay, I will search. I mean, the advice before I ask this question, the advice from the officer is that this is not something that we'd be able to support in planning. Councillor Waters.
I would quite happily second such a condition, providing it was worded for solar generation, because you would have thought a responsible organisation like JRHT would want to make the houses look as good as possible and would consider the use of solar roof tiles.
This is also 100% affordable housing scheme. It's not a market housing scheme. So there isn't the same in terms of, I know this isn't relevant. Well, it is relevant. It's very relevant. It's an affordable housing scheme, and we have to be reasonable in terms of what we're asking. We consider that it complies with the relevant policies within the local plan. To ask for anything extra is, and I'm going to look at Sandra at this point, we consider unreasonable, and we don't think it passed the tests. And if it was to be appealed as an unreasonable condition, I don't think that we could defend that.
Right, I'll start Councillor Melly first.
Could I please second the proposal to approve subject to Section 106 agreement?
Yeah, thanks.
So I think
Yeah, I was just asking for advice. If we've had a proposal and a seconder for the change to the condition, do we need to test it with a vote? Essentially, that is the question here.
Did we not have a proposal and a seconder for the officer recommendation already?
No,
No, had that not been, that hadn't been seconded.
Right.
So you've got your.
Yeah.
Sorry, right, I mean, just to clarify, you've got your proposed and your seconder over there. You're then going to have to consider councillor Orrell's proposal
Yeah,
for an
right.
amended.
I mean, that
condition
was
with-
what I was
So
understanding.
if you vote for whether or not you approve, you agree with the recommendation,
yeah.
you'll then have to vote on whether or not you support the proposal for the condition, which is against officer advice.
Yeah.
Okay.
We'll have to do that first, so won't we see now it is.
Well, no,
We
you
don't
have to
do it
decide if you're going to
afterwards.
approve it first.
But Chair, is it not the general normal practice to
Do the condition
test
first.
the officer recommendation first, which does not include that
Yeah,
condition? Yeah.
Right, well, and then we do a further vote.
to see if you want to add the condition.
Okay, it's normally gone the other way around before, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Do it condition then first.
And that's the way we've normally done it, isn't it? The condition. I mean, to be honest, I'm happy to have this. I would just put across my point of view on this, which is that it's been very clear guidance on what we can and can't do. You sat on the committee as people who are trying to do things within the rules of planning policy. So you're putting yourself in a pretty questionable position if you do vote for something that's been given this guidance on, but that's fine. That's to be done.
Chair, Becky's quite right. If the trust don't like it, they can appeal it. But we've been told that they're considering it anyway, so.
Okay, so the proposal is for a condition that would request to add solar panels or enforce the addition of solar panels or solar generation, sorry, to use your correct solar generation. Doesn't that mean it would create solar? Right, solar panels. I'm going to stick with solar panels. I will use word afterwards. Sorry, solar. Yeah, solar.
Sorry, Chair, can I just intervene, please?
Yeah.
And just check with the Chief Planning Officer whether this actually is an amendment to the application, because of course, only the application that is before the committee can be considered. Would you consider this actually an amendment to the application, which therefore cannot be considered?
I think we could, God, blimey. I think probably we could condition it if it was a reasonable condition. But it isn't. So there's your, I think in terms of, could we require something that we'd have to ask for a scheme for full details if we were going down that route, because we haven't got anything. It couldn't just be, you've got to put it on. It would have to be, we require a scheme for details of solar generation on the site, and we'd have to work some wording around it, but I'm sticking with my advice. It isn't a reasonable condition.
Okay. All right, I'm going to Councillor Culling and come to you again.
Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
It's not often that I find myself disagreeing with my colleague, Councillor Orrell, and much though I support the sentiment of what he's saying, I think that in planning terms, it's probably not the route to be taken, particularly given as this wasn't something that was brought up within the deferral of this application when it came before us. Although I would very much welcome solar generation on this and other developments within the orbit of the Joseph Rowntree Housing Trust. So even if it is something that we vote on, I won't be supporting it at the vote.
Okay, I'll pick that up before we do it. Okay. Councillor Baxter, and then I've got Councillor Coles.
I just wondered whether it was reasonable at all to ask for solar panels on this application, given we don't insist on it in every application, and wondered whether Becky could give some advice on that as to whether we should be insisting, as much as it's great to have solar generation, whether we should insist it on every application. I don't know if we're suggesting it on this one, why we haven't to the previous or any other one that's come before this committee before.
I can't answer why it hasn't been insisted on by councillors before. I can just give advice that we look at it and we've made an assessment and the measures there are acceptable in terms of planning policy, and we think that is acceptable. Anything else becomes unreasonable, hence the advice. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Right, Councillor Coles, did you want to speak? And I've got Councillor
Just briefly, Chair, thank you. Just to echo Councillor Colwick's point that I feel like anything here that would be an unreasonable planning addition is going to delay something that we have already delayed once. And there is a risk that if we apply further conditions unnecessarily counter to planning guidance from planning officers, all we're going to do is risk potentially further delaying something if it gets appealed. And actually what we should be doing is encouraging efforts that Jersey Factory Housing Trust might want to make to impose to add on solar generation to this development, as we should to any developer who wants to add solar generation to their developments. That's a good thing, but I don't think it's a planning condition that we should be adding to this development because we've already delayed it once and we should be just getting on with approving it.
Okay, thank you. Do you want to speak?
Yeah, I think it happens a lot at both planning committees that there's a lot of developments that we would like to be more environmentally friendly, better for biodiversity. It happens all the time, but we're limited by planning policy and what we can actually condition. I think, you know, the officer recommendation has been proposed and seconded. I think we should move to the vote on that and test that. If that fails, if that doesn't pass, then we can consider alternative options. And if there's committee members who feel like this isn't acceptable as it currently is, but it would be acceptable if it was conditioned there'd be solar panels, then we can test that if if the committee doesn't approve it in its current form. And so I think we should move to the vote.
Can I make an alternative suggestion that we do test what has been proposed? I anticipate that it won't succeed, and then we move to consider the application.
Yeah, the only slight problem with that, sorry, I will come to you. The only slight problem that I'm being advised that can you provide the advice, please, Sandra?
Well, Chair, I think it is in the protocol, the planning committee protocol, that the normal practice is that the officer recommendation is tested first. And the officer recommendation does not include this additional condition.
Chair, we often add conditions to applications on a regular basis.
Yeah, fine. Look, in that, that was the advice I've had. Sorry, I'll come to you, Councillor Vassy, but I think the situation we're at, we're going to have to take the vote and then we'll move to the actual vote. And if it's a recommendation, I'm fine with that. Councillor Vassy, sorry, you've wanted to speak for a while.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd just like to note the irony of us saying that solar panels are less likely to go on affordable housing. All of us around this table know that the poorer you are, the more percentage of your income you spend on energy. So we did hear earlier on that it would be unlikely because it was social housing or affordable housing. So that's just a general comment. Secondly, on the issue of hedges, and I know people find it kind of frustrating that we go over and over these issues, but Councillor Coles did mention precedent around the place. You've only got to look at Google Maps to see that on both Alder Avenue and White Rose Avenue, those mature hedges have been cut back severely all the way along that boundary. The only place where it is actually a huge mature blossoming hedge is on the site that we're looking at. So that's why it's considered to be of importance. I understand that this can be frustrating for the applicant and for others, but this is the moment when we decide to defend or not to defend things. And then the moment, as Councillor Waters says, has gone. Once it's cut, it doesn't come back, which is why various suggestions were made. There is much that is good about this application. I'm not opposed to the application. I do struggle to see why we find it such a difficulty to attach conditions simply in order to make things better. For me, that's why we're here. That's why it's not all delegated to officers. And I'm happy to play that part and to give up my time. And I suspect all of us are happy to do that in order to try to achieve meaningful outcomes. So I'm interested to see how everyone votes. As I say, I'm not hugely exercised over the substantive part of the application. I do think we have a duty to stand up and defend things that are worth defending.
Thank you. Okay, so taking this in two parts, we've got a vote on I'm going to take a vote on the additional condition for solar energy generation to be applied across houses, an expectation that will be applied across houses, with wording, the specific wording to be reserved, to be agreed between chair and vice chair. So in that base of that, can I see all those who are for adding that condition? And all those who are against? And all those who abstain? Okay, so we won't be adding that condition, but I thank you for your time in the discussion. And I've had a proposer and a seconder for moving after recommendation it stands without the condition where we are. So if you take us through that, please, Becky.
So the application is recommended for approval as on page 143. It's to give delegated authority to myself to approve the application, subject to the completion of a section 106 agreement, the final wording of the conditions, and to finalise the section 106 agreement, and then the conditions of page 44 onwards. Okay, thank you.
Okay, can I see those who are for moving the officer recommendation as there's out there? And those who are against? And those who abstain? Okay, thank you. In that case, the application is approved. That was the last item that we had on the agenda today, so we will close the meeting there, and thank everyone for their time this evening. Cheers.